confess, bowing here, I find my rest. And without you, I fall apart. You're the one that guides my heart. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Where sin runs deep, your grace is more. Where grace is found is where you are. And where you are, I am free. Holiness is Christ in me. And Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. So teach my song to rise to you when temptation comes my way. And when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. You're my one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. You're my one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you.
Well, first of all, so grateful for Gideon's International, who puts those Bibles in hotel rooms all over the world. A place for people to find hope when they least expect it. So we're grateful for them. So I have a question for you to start out this morning. Have you ever had a bad day? Okay, I'm looking at a couple of you, and it looks like you're already there with that. And sometimes those bad days progress, to bad weeks or bad years. I couldn't help it. Something came across my news feed this week that I thought, you know what, I'm going to share that story with everybody. Every once in a while, I'll share a story. Here it is. There I was, sitting at the bar, staring at my drink, when a large, troublemaking biker steps up next to me, grabs my drink, and gulps it down in one swig. Well, what you going to do about it, he says menacingly, as I burst into tears. Come on, man, the biker says. I didn't think you'd cry. I can't stand it when a man's crying. This is the worst day of my life, I say. I'm a complete failure. I was late to a meeting and my boss fired me. When I went to the parking lot, I found my car had been stolen and I don't have any insurance. I left my wallet in the cab I took home. I got home and found my old lady ran off with the gardener, and then my dog bit me. So I came to this bar to work up the courage to put an end to it all. I buy a drink, I drop a capsule in it, and sit here watching the poison dissolve. Then you big jerk, show up and drink the whole thing. But enough about me, how's your day going? That biker's having a bad day. Well, because that other guy had a bad day. And that happens to us sometimes. Our bad day can be contagious on other people's bad days or vice versa. And maybe you've experienced that. It's amazing, though, how some bad days become bad years, bad lives. Because the stuff that happened keeps happening. And it's hard to know what to do in those tough situations. And you're thinking to yourself, I thought in faith, I was supposed to have it a little easier than in life. Why are these things continuing to happen? Well, thus the series that we're in, He Knows. Last week we talked about how He knows your name. I mean, He loves you. He knows everything about you. Today we're going to talk about He knows what I'm going through and He cares. Next week we're going to talk about He knows what I've done and forgives. I hope you'll be here next week for that, and I hope you'll invite all of your friends and neighbors, and especially people you don't like, to that sermon. And then He knows what I need and provides. He knows all of that. And that's why if you brought a Bible or you have your device, I'd like you to turn to the letter to the Hebrews. It's in the New Testament. Should I start the music and we can all say the 66 books in order with the music? The Hebrews, who were a people who were really going through a rough time. These people had believed what they'd heard and put their faith in Christ at great peril to themselves. As a matter of fact, many of them have had their families reject them, or people stopped doing business with them in their community because they had put their faith in Jesus. And they'd walked away in some respects from the belief that they grew up with. And this was hard for other Hebrews to accept, that there would be people that follow Christ. And when times get hard, we can begin to wonder if embracing faith in Christ is true, or if it's, here's what we usually say, or if it's working. Is this faith thing working for me? Have you ever been there? Wondering if God was really there? If He is, does He care about me at all? You've prayed, you've worshiped, you've obeyed, you've read the Bible, and you're still struggling. You've lost a job, you've got sick kids, you lose a parent or someone you love, and it's easy to wonder, isn't it? Where are you, God? Where are you in all of this? And that's what the writer's reminding these Hebrews, that Jesus Himself suffered for the benefit of the world. The Son of God with skin on, went through all of the difficulties of this life ahead of us. And to encourage them, He tells them this. And in Hebrews chapter 4, beginning with verse 14, it says this: "Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet He did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." Now, I really want to dial in on that little part of the whole letter of Hebrews. Here it is, stuck in there in the middle of this whole discussion about who Jesus is and what He means for their life. And I've said it over and over, by the way, to people, and maybe you get sick of hearing it, but I like saying it because it's a good reminder for me, so just watch me having my devotions up here. How you think is how you feel. How you think is how you feel. And so how does the writer to the Hebrews address or try to help the people? He approaches it with their thinking. Here's what you need to know in your mind that is true and right about Jesus. And I think you need true thoughts to deal with this struggle that you're in. He is there, and He knows what you're going through, and He does care. He knows what you're going through. First of all, He tells him this because of who He is. I mean, the whole beginning of the letter is emphasizing that he is so much more than they could ever ask or imagine. Now, let me just ask you a question. When you want to talk to somebody about stuff that's going on in your life, if you need some kind of a counselor, you want them to have credentials. So if you're going to a professional, you want to know that they've had an education in this, that they've got some kind of license, that they've got experience in this. Maybe you talk to references or other people who've used them, but somehow you want that person to be qualified to listen to your junk. Or it may just be a friend that you want to confide in, but you want that friend to be compassionate. You want that friend to be trustworthy, someone that you know will keep things in confidence. One way or the other, anybody you talk to about the junk in your life, you want them to be qualified to hear it. You're not just going to talk to anybody. Now see, that's what the writer lays out for Jesus here. These are his credentials for you to consider as you think about what it is you're doing with your difficult circumstances. Now, he starts out with this word, he's the great high priest. And what's interesting is they all come from this Hebrew background, so they knew exactly who that was. In their community, there would be one person, really the most revered, respected human being in their community, the great high priest. And that guy would walk through the veil into what was called the Holy of Holies, the only guy that was allowed in the Holy of Holies. Once a year, he would go into the Holy of Holies with the sacrifice and sprinkle the blood of the lamb on the Ark of the Covenant, and that would be for the forgiveness of the sins of the whole nation. I would say he's a pretty important dude. And here's the thing that he says, for we have this great high priest. Now what's interesting is that if you look at the original language, look at the Greek that he uses here, he's using the word great high priest, but actually it should be translated, we have the greatest high priest. So if you look at any high priest who's ever served our community, the fact is that Jesus is the greatest high priest. And he says, to put that in perspective, we have to think about it here. Great high priest passed through the veil into the Holy of Holies. Jesus ascended into heaven. He passed through the veil of this dimension into the next and sits at the right hand of God. And what's amazing about this is that he didn't just, offer the sacrifice. He was the sacrifice. And so this is what he's saying. This is what I want you to understand about him. He's not just a priest, he's the Son of God. And how you think impacts how you feel. And once you get that truth and that reality in your head that this isn't just some freak that came along and people thought he was cool and followed him and now it became tough for them, so just bail. No, this is God himself. And even more than his status as the greatest high priest, look what the writer says in the verse just before our passage in verse 13. Here's what he says. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give an account. The whole point is he knows everything that's going on. He knows everything that's going on in you because of who he is. He knows everything that's been done to you, and he knows everything you have done. All of that because he's more than the greatest high priest. He's the Son of God who sits at the right hand of God the Father. So if you're wondering if God's not paying attention, the Bible tells us he knows. He knows. Now, I have to be honest with you. How does he do that? 7+ billion people, and he knows everything about all of them. That's why he's God and I'm not. Because it tells us he's fully connected in awareness of what's happening in all he's created. He knows. And the Hebrew struggle was not lost on him, and your struggle is not lost on him. Nothing in all of his creation is outside of his knowledge and awareness. Now, I get it though. It's sometimes hard to see when you're in the fog of war. I'm in the midst of all of this, and it's hard to imagine that God cares because this is so hard. And I get it. Life can be hard. And honestly, it can be hard to pray. sometimes even when you're in your deepest, darkest moment, you're in your biggest struggle, you're wondering, are you there? I remember when we took our kids over to Columbus, Ohio, in the Center of Science and Industry, you call it COSI, and they have all these hands-on things you do, and you leave there really messy because it was all hands-on. And there was this one part where all of the soap is in this giant tub, and they bring out these giant rings. Now, we've all done the little, blow the soap and it turns into bubbles, right? Only these things were massive. And you took my whole width of my arms, and I'm laying this thing in here and pulling it up, and sure enough, this big bubble comes up. And you go like this, and wow, you could hear the music, there's something like that. And this giant bubble that just starts to float and then pops. I mean, just about that quick. 1 second, pop. And I think sometimes that's how we feel about our prayers when we're going through a tough time. Like I say something, and it starts to float, and this huge big thing I got going on, but then pop. I'm not really sure it got to God. I'm not really sure that got much past my forehead. Is he there? Does he care? Well, this is the whole thing that the writer's telling us. He knows what you're going through, and he hears your prayer because of who he is. And I could pause here too, though, and say, okay, even if I believe that, so what? Just because he hears my prayer doesn't mean he cares about my prayer. And yet I'm reminded of what Jesus said. And you can read it, by the way, if you want to look in Matthew chapter 10. But he says it this way, not one sparrow falls outside of his care. Not one sparrow. And then he said earlier in that book, if God takes care of the sparrows, how much more is he going to take care of you? See, he not only knows all about it, he is caring deeply for you. Well, and that's why the next verse is so important, verse 15 that we read in Hebrews 4. For we do not have a high priest who cannot empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. You see, he not only knows what you're going through because of who he is, he knows what you're going through because of what he feels. Now the fact is that other English translations, older translations in English, would say there, because we don't have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses. Sympathize. And that's because the Greek word used there is sympatheo. Let's all say that together. Sympatheo. Now, don't you feel like you're a Greek scholar now that you said that? But see, it's obvious to see then why we got the word sympathy in the English from that word. But the fact is that word doesn't mean sympathy, which is simply feeling sorry for someone. I have compassion for you. I feel sorry for you for what you're going through. Empathy means that I've had that same experience in my life, and therefore I can internalize those feelings that you're feeling right now. I mean, I have a lot more understanding and knowledge of what you've experienced because of my experience. And yet, sympatheo doesn't even mean that. It means more than that. Actually, sympatheo means that he actually feels what you're feeling when you feel it. So in other words, yes, he feels compassion for you, sympathy. He has experienced everything you've ever experienced and even more. And yet at the same time, whatever it is you're feeling, because his spirit lives in you, he feels that pain with you. At the same time, I get pretty excited about that. Knowing that when I come to him and try to explain to him what's going on in my world and I need his help, that he's not only hearing me and feeling some compassion for me, but he's embracing everything within me upon himself. You see, this is what you need to understand about this great high priest, this Jesus. He's more than compassion and knowledge and experience. He wants you to know you are never suffering alone. Never. He suffers with you. And other Bible passages actually talk about this as well. I mean, if you go back 800 years before Jesus and the prophet Isaiah talking about when the Messiah would come to the world, who is Jesus, here's what he said. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. And like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Now think about what he just said that. He didn't deserve anything that happened to him. It wasn't fair. Have you ever said that? This isn't fair? Okay, maybe just me. He wasn't appreciated. And yet it wasn't right what was happening to him. He was blamed for no reason. And he sacrificed with no gratitude in return. He did all of this so that our punishment could be upon him. What we deserved, he took. Imagine how that felt. Maybe it's just like you. Maybe you felt that way. Why am I being punished? Why is this happening to me? I didn't do anything. I'm innocent in all of this. Why? But wait, there's more to it. Look, if you went to Romans chapter 8, look, here's what Paul says. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. For we don't know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. Now, let's see if we can put all this together for you. So here's this greatest high priest. He's passed through the heavens, Son of God, sitting at the right hand of God, who's feeling what you're feeling when you're feeling it. Now, I'm asking you, have you ever gone to a time of prayer when you were just in the deepest, darkest struggle and had no words for this? You had no words for what it is you're experiencing, no words for what you're feeling. You don't know what to pray. You see what he says here? He says, the Spirit himself intercedes or prays for you with words that aren't even human words. So as you are sitting there without any words to say and you're just trying to communicate with God and you're saying, here I am, God, I got nothing. You know what I'm feeling. You know what I'm experiencing. Jesus takes all of that, he's feeling it too, and translates it into God talk for you. He prays on your behalf. How cool is that? I love that. And this is the God who's saying to you, come to me. Now, it's interesting, as he's feeling what you're feeling when you feel it, and he's praying on your behalf, let's make sure we understand it. So when you cry, he cries. When you feel like you've been kicked in the gut, he feels that with you. And when you're at the end of your emotional rope and you just don't know where to turn, he's there at the end of that emotional rope holding on to you, helping you. That's what he's telling us. It's really amazing that he knows what you're going through because of what he feels, because he feels it with you when you're feeling it. And yet when he went through all of that himself, he didn't give up. And here's what I mean by that. It says he went all through all of that, yet he did not sin. He didn't choose rejecting God and truth. He didn't choose abandoning his mission, even though it was hard. He didn't choose blaming or cursing God or getting mad at God because of how hard this was. Whatever you're going through, he's been through worse, and he had the courage and power to not give up on his faith and his mission. And that's his Spirit that he puts in you when you trust him, when you follow him. You know, I get it. This is not easy stuff. I remember talking about this one time a few years ago at a youth retreat in Pennsylvania. And afterward, I invited all of the students who wanted to pray about their pain, and all of them came to an altar and prayed, all of them. And afterward, a girl about 13 or 14 years old, I wasn't sure, asked to speak with me, and she began to talk about this. She said, you know, I've never heard it that way before, and I've really had trouble praying. And she said, because all through when I was a little kid, my brother abused me. And he doesn't now, and he's become a follower of Christ, but she said, I've just really struggled in how much that hurt and how much it still hurts. I was forgiven, and I don't ever know how to talk to God about it because I feel dirty, I feel ashamed. I never understood how to talk about it before. And for the first time, here's what she said, for the first time today, I was able to know that he felt what I was feeling and prays for me. Prays for me. And I think that that's the best part of his knowledge. Not that we can say, wow, we worship this amazing, omniscient God, but rather, wow, we worship this amazing, omniscient God, and he actually cares about my life every day. This is great news, men and women. Great news. I don't know if you've heard this before, but I just want you to know you're not walking through this alone. He can be trusted even when you think the only way out is to choose things that he doesn't want for you as a way to deal with your struggles. That's what he's calling you to trust him. I mean, that's what the whole letter was about. Just trust him. And here's what he says. Look, verse 16, chapter 4. Let us approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. You see, not only because of who he is and what he feels, but he knows what you're going through and he's ready to help. He's ready, arms wide open. And honestly, to be honest, we can all tempt whether or not God actually cares about us when we think of how big the universe is, and we think of how many people there are, and I'm just one of them. We can get deceived into believing that somehow he doesn't care. So look, he reiterates it again. He says, come with confidence to the throne of grace. The throne, showing again who he is as king of the universe. Now, some translations say it this way, let us approach the throne of grace boldly. And actually, that's the word we've used here when we talk about praying bold prayers. It means, as the translation we read this morning, it means to come with confidence, but what some people have interpreted it to mean is come with arrogance to the throne of grace and lay before God your expectations. Boldly doesn't mean arrogantly when you come with your demands and he's required to produce them. Boldly means coming with confidence that he hears and wants to give you what you really need the most, his mercy and his grace to help you in your time of need. Why mercy and grace? I mean, why doesn't he just make it better and do what he's told? You know, I've wondered that sometimes. Why not just handle it the way I ask you to, God? And we do that sometimes. We advise God. Have you ever done that? Have you ever advised God? I've advised God. He's laughing still today at my advice. But we tell him that we think this is the way it should go. And he's saying, I'll tell you what, the whole point of your life is to trust me. That's why you live and breathe, is to honor me, trust me, no matter the situation. That's why you're here. When life is good, we can forget God's involvement, can't we? Honestly, I wonder sometimes if people trust God less in the good times than they do in the bad. And yet, when life is tough, we might come to him with our long list of expectations, but God's desire for our life is that our faith in him would be increased every day. And sometimes struggle is the only way to get my attention, so he allows it to continue. But he is always available to help. He's always ready to pour out his mercy and grace. Mercy, let's make sure we get those two terms in our minds. Mercy, that's all of the dumb stuff I've done that he chooses to forgive. You know, all of the bad choices, the sins, the failures in my life, I can bring those to him with all of the problems I've created for myself, and he offers me mercy. Even if the rest of the world wants to punish me, he offers me forgiveness. That's his mercy. But then grace, which is this courage, this power, this fortitude to endure suffering so we can suffer well. so we can suffer in a way that honors God. And instead of defaulting to the things that might numb the pain for a while, he says to me, hey, look, I can help in a way that's so much better than all of that stuff. Our community group is doing a Bible study right now that was developed by Pastor Matt Chandler, who's a pastor in Texas and the Village Community Church out there. And Matt was just in the midst in his 30s of absolutely thriving ministry. Everything's going great. He's teaching the Word of God. Thousands are coming to Christ and people are really beginning to hear it. And all of a sudden he's not feeling well and he gets the diagnosis that he has brain cancer. Brain cancer. And recently I was listening to an interview that a television station did with him. And here's what he said in the midst of all of that. To have the opportunity, I just laughed when I read that word, to have the opportunity to battle what's life-threatening, to have everything that's dear put on the table next to Christ and to be able to go, no, he's better. He's still my preference. And to have been given the public forum from which I get to do this, that for me is why this is a real gift. Now, what kind of crazy person says that? Hey, I got this brain cancer. Thank you for the gift. Who does that? Well, someone who gets God and understands what every opportunity brings us in terms of honoring him. But understand this, he also didn't say he liked it. He just saw it as an opportunity. Here's what else he said. Now, let me be very clear. I'd much rather bring him glory by preaching. I'd much rather bring him glory by driving an 01 Impala that backfires in school zones. I'd much rather bring him glory by giving away a large part of our income. I'd much rather glorify him than those ways than have brain cancer, but I don't get to choose that. You see, somehow, some way, God allows these things to happen so that I can honor God in my suffering. Because we have to understand that these things don't come upon us because God puts them upon us. These things happen because we live in a fallen world. And sometimes things happen to us of no choice of our own, or sometimes things happen because of bad choices we make. But in the end, there are opportunities for us to suffer well for God's glory. So what's the solution? He says, come with confidence to me for mercy and grace to help you in your time of need. Help. I put help in capital letters with multiple exclamation points that my daughter says, stop using multiple exclamation points. You see, these Hebrews, they were actually praying to angels and praying to spiritists and going to them for advice, or they'd travel back to their old friends and their old ways to get advice on how to deal with their struggle, and they wanted to abandon this Jesus faith. And God says, no. That's the opposite of what you can be doing. You come with confidence to me right now in your suffering and receive mercy and grace and strength to help you. You can suffer well. And so I'm going to say to you today, now what? What do you do with all of this? Well, if you're not suffering today, I think that's awesome. Congratulations. I mean, really. But you have to understand that at some point in your life, at least once, you will. You'll be facing something at least once, but probably more. And so I hope this is an encouragement now before it ever happens to you. But if you're struggling now, he's saying right now in this moment, look, my arms are wide open. Come boldly, come with confidence that I love you and I'm going to give you all the grace and mercy you need to honor me with your life when in the end, that is your ultimate goal. To bring God glory in good times or bad. You see, he knows my name. I get that. And he knows what I'm going through. He knows what you're going through. And so it's really as simple as this. Just admit it. You need help. I know there's some independent people in the world that think this is awful, that somehow we always have to go to God for some kind of help. Yet we have to admit that. Admit it. You need help. And then ask. Admit and ask. That's as simple as it gets. Just come to him, be honest. Even if you can't find the right words to explain what it is you're feeling, you've already got that figured out now. He's going to translate all of that so he can pour out his grace upon you, his mercy upon you, no matter what you've done, no matter what's been done to you, no matter what the struggle is now. You do not walk through that valley alone. He walks with you. He knows what you're going through, and he cares.